Welcome to The Bird Who Made Me Happy. This is Alicia Bridge, and I am your host. We're going to dive into the topic of what is it about bird songs that makes us so happy.
You had a daughter and you brought her home.
When I think about why I first became intrigued about bird songs, I can honestly say it might have been the stress of motherhood and the need to find some calm amongst everything. It could have also been my worry about the pandemic. Either way, I was on the search for answers for how to cope with the stress I was experiencing. And then one day, on a drive, I heard a bird song. And it changed me.
The times are different now.
My next guest is Gail Mitchell. Gail joined the Victoria Junior Naturalists in 1956 at the age of 12 under the mentorship of the renowned Freeman Skipper King. She holds a BSc majoring in botany and held a position as a biology and botany lab instructor at the University of Victoria. She is now a grandmother, the former president of the Cowichan Valley Naturalist Society, and current volunteer at the Cowichan Estuary Nature Center. Her love for birds is contagious. We're in this incredible piece of property, and there are birds all around us, and I'm curious what it's like for you as a listener. How much of your attention right now is on the birds?
Well, certainly when we pause, it's all on the birds. I know they're there, but my problem is trying to guess what they are, who is speaking, who is singing to us. I have some attention on them all the time, I guess.
Yeah. I've been talking with this gentleman, Chris Adam, and he talks a little bit about the difference between being in nature and being with nature. And I wonder, how do you find that are you able to turn off that part of your brain that is identifying them? Or as a naturalist, is that just part and parcel?
I think it's part and parcel. I don't really want to turn it off. It's just, I'm always wanting to know what the diversity is. Do we just have house sparrows chirping away here? No. We have siskins. We have the odd Steller's jay, and I'm not sure about some of the others.
And one of the things I'm fascinated by is the difference between the songs and the calls. Can you tell me a bit more about them?
The songs are related to setting up territory, attracting a mate. The calls are usually a warning of some kind.
Okay.
And they can be, of course, completely different.
Yeah.
The little house sparrows that are going chirp, 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 they don't really have much of a song. The pine siskins, which is a lot of what we're hearing here, there's all that background twitter, are mainly pine siskins. I'm not aware of their song. I'm just aware of that twittering. But they may have a song. I just haven't really been in a place where they've been setting up a territory or when they would actually sing. See, that was definitely a warning. I think that was a pine siskin.
Okay. That one? Yeah. And do you find that in knowing those, when you hear a bird giving a warning, that it changes the way you look at the environment, or it changes your observations?
Well, sure, because you think, oh, I wonder why. Is it me that's causing them to give that sharp warning call, or is there a cat nearby, or is there a hawk nearby? You know, if you're in the woods and you hear warning calls going on from quite a group of birds, then you think, aha, maybe there's an owl sitting in a tree somewhere. Oh, and the odd rooster.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit. I spoke with one gentleman who works for Ancient Forest Alliance, and he spoke to me about the difference of listening to birds in a space like this. You know, we're very open. They're feeding. They're not necessarily nesting right here. Do you notice, sort of in the Cowichan Valley, how the bird songs change based on the landscape?
You know, birds will get really quiet when they're nesting.
Well, tell me a little bit more. How do you notice that they get quiet when they're nesting? What happens?
You might have seen wrens around and heard them singing and then chirping little warning calls, and then you don't hear anything at all. And then all of a sudden, I saw this actually on a post today, you realize that wren has nested in a little crack in the side of your wall. And you just didn't know they were there, although you had seen them there all through even the winter, and then in the spring. A pair started singing to each other, and then all of a sudden, nothing. But they were there.
Oh, wow. You had to identify a moment or a time in your life when your affinity for birds started?
Well, really, my affinity for nature started at a really early age. I was a second daughter, and my parents really wanted a son, I think. So they often pushed me outside to help Dad, and I ended up loving being outside. And then when I was in grade 6, my grandparents bought me a membership in the Victoria Natural History Junior Group, and that started me because Freeman King, Skipper King, who the nature house at Goldstream is named after, he became our leader, and we were out every Saturday walking, hiking in the Victoria area and learning all we could. But my focus was on plants. And in university I studied botany. It wasn't until I became a part naturalist and realizing I need to learn more about birds and insects and all sorts of things that I really got started. So it was my young adult life that I became really interested in birds. And I'm still learning. I'm not an expert.
Yeah, and I want to ask you a question about what you think it might have meant for you as a young person to have those opportunities to be in nature, to be in this place that it looks like it brought you quite a bit of happiness.
It's just the most important thing in my life. That's where I want to be, outdoors. My happy place, as they say, my real happy place is paddling a canoe on a lake and hearing a loon calling. Those are such happy memories. So birds are a really important part of being in nature. They're the part of nature that so many people are drawn to. Identifying them, listening to them.
Yeah, it makes me think that even as someone myself who has only sort of been aware of birds in the periphery, I now listen. I was listening to some of Neville's songs and I was going through his list. And I actually don't remember the name of one of these, but I went through it and I all of a sudden felt my childhood. That sound was so clear to me. That's my childhood.
A red-winged blackbird or something like that, something really distinctive.
Yeah.
Even if you haven't been focused on birds, that'll bring you back.
An budding cottonwood plant will do the same thing for me.
The smell.
I'm right back into my childhood. That feeling of being outside, springtime. I guess in that, I'm curious, do you have a particular bird that just moves you in a way that you can't get enough of it, or you would stop what you're doing and just...
Yeah, there are, but I think I've been thinking about this for a while because anticipating talking to you, what is my favorite bird song? And it's hard to have one. But if you're in a dark forest walking along and all of a sudden you hear this beautiful warbling trill, it goes on and on and on and on and on, like a bubbling brook or something. Do you know what that is? Well, they used to be called winter wrens. And I don't know why they were called winter wrens, because we have them here in the winter, but we also have them at other seasons. It has the most beautiful, beautiful song. And you just stop on the trail and listen. And then you try and find it, and you're lucky if you do, because they're tiny. They're really tiny, brown, with a tiny little, cutest little upturned tail. You know, all the wrens have upturned tails, but the Pacific wren, as it's called now, has a tiny little upturned tail. And here I am showing you with my hands.
Yeah.
The other bird that I just love. I wait and wait for it, and it comes here later in the spring. Maybe we'll hear it towards the end of May or early June even, and that's the Swainson thrush. And again, if you're lucky enough to live in a place where you have a bit of a forest, they're very hard to see, but you just hear them. Have you heard that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. They seem to come, set up their territory, nest, and leave. So it's just sort of that end of May to early August that you hear them. Very special.
Yeah, and I'm always deeply curious about how we live in attuning to nature. I'm curious, you can name a bird and it arrives and its departure date or it's the season, and I wonder what it's like for you to live in attunement with these birds coming and going. I guess I want to know what it's like to live in the kind of rhythms of the bird.
Yep. And I've been waiting and waiting for the violet-green swallows to arrive at our house, because they've come every spring, and ever since my childhood. We used to have a little contest. First person to see a violet-green swallow gets a prize. But it's been a cold start to spring, and I haven't yet seen a violet-green swallow, although I know the tree swallows are back at Somnos Marsh. Violet greens may be here, but I just haven't seen one yet. So that is the iconic waiting for the swallow. Well, you know that swallows returning to Capistrano or something. Well, the swallows returning to my backyard. And then in the winter, we don't often see varied thrush so much during the summer, but it's very special to see a varied thrush in the winter. I associate winter with varied thrush.
It makes me think about how you live in relationship. Would that be fair to say that you live in relationship? Like when you talk about one of these birds returning, I feel that sense of anticipation of a friend, you know, a friend coming back or a relative coming. And I wonder, does that speak true to you at all? Does that feel as if you have a relationship?
Oh, I had never thought of it that way, but I think it's true, because it's a real yahoo! Here are the swallows! They've come back! I just saw a swallow! Woo!
Yeah.
It's like greeting somebody. This is a little aside, but I traveled to Tanzania to a little village, and the greeting we got from the women in the little village. And they rolled on the ground and they're so happy. I just feel that exuberant when I see swallows again.
One of the things that I've learned is that a loud sound that comes in draws our attention to it. You know, we kind of pause what we're doing, we're focusing there. Whereas the bird songs are more of a like rhythm or a pattern or a melody in the background. And that they do almost the opposite experience to us, where they kind of allow us to feel relaxed, sink in potentially. And that's sort of what some of the research said. And I just wondered, what happens for you when you walk out the door and you hear bird songs?
I think I really relax. I actually think my muscles relax and my ears open up. And aside from the rooster across the fence there's some, and that Steller's jay, there's some really beautiful little melodies going on.
It amazes me that Steller's jay is really interrupting me. So beautiful though. I'm curious about the aesthetic beauty of bird songs, and as someone who's interested in conservation, as someone who's, spends time understanding bird habitats and working with other people who are looking at bird habitats, I'm curious, do you think that there's an aesthetic information or an aesthetic meaning behind the bird songs that is related to us wanting to or needing to conserve them? Does someone who's listening to more bird songs naturally want to create more bird habitat?
Yes, yes. Why do people who make gardens like this, maybe these are all introduced plants, or a lot of them are, but it's bringing habitat so that the birds are here, can enjoy sitting right in the middle of it and benefiting from it. It's not being in a forest, but I think we humans really crave to be in as natural a setting as possible, as often as possible. Certainly we've learned a lot about that in the last couple of years, of people getting out and getting into the forest and benefiting so much from it. I like to take people on nature hikes, and I like to get them to stop and listen. And I am convinced that by listening to birdsong especially, they will come away with a greater appreciation, I'm hoping, and maybe the incentive to think about conserving habitat. Conserving habitat is the number one thing we have to do. But by making a garden, that's the second best thing, I guess. You create habitat.
Yeah.
This family have such an incredible diversity of plants, and that brings a diversity of insects and a diversity of birds.
I think one of the other questions I want to ask is, there's a group that you belong to who goes out and takes bird surveys. Can you describe for me why people get up, sometimes in like terrible weather?
Well, I think they get proud of their activities as citizen scientists. The reason I do it, and I believe the reason why many of the naturalists do it that within Cowichan Valley, is because we're really aware that lots of species are in decline, and we want to document what's happening over as long a period of time as we can.
I'm thinking a little bit about how you described the homecoming of these birds and the delight it brings to you. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what it stirs in you when you observe declines or you observe species not coming back. How does it affect your happiness on the other scale? Your unhappiness.
Yes, it's sadness, is worry. It's worry. I'm a grandmother, and I would really love to have my grandchildren and maybe their grandchildren experience some of the things that I love. I guess I'm being presumptuous in thinking that people would love the things I love, but when it comes to nature, how can you not?
Yeah, I think science is in your favor.
And melancholy, I mentioned melancholy earlier because as we age, as we humans age, we have to downsize. We have to move, in our case, from a lovely 5-acre property of forest and meadow and little stream to a townhouse with a lot of black top and small garden areas. I always think I was so lucky. I was so lucky to be in that place for over 20 years, to be able to sit on my porch and hear that. And so it's happy memories. It's just the sadness of human aging. And I am very fortunate that I haven't lost any hearing that I know of. I know that likely I'll lose those high pitches, as so many older people do. But at the moment I can hear all those sounds.
Yeah, I think that losing of that soundscape can happen in so many different ways. But the impact to an individual is, it might be a bit of a leap to say that you derive a certain amount of your happiness from those experiences, or that it's an active.
That's not a leap at all. That's where most of my happiness comes, is thinking about all the wonderful things I've had, having those memories to look back on and be able to reminisce about. Yeah. And it always brings a smile to our faces. You remember when we were paddling on Myrtle Lake and we got into a rainstorm and we crawled into the tent and we waited for the rainstorm to be over, and just as it ended, a huge group of loons all started calling just offshore from our tent. They had gathered after the storm. Can you imagine? It was just amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I can see the happiness that comes over you, and especially the loons. I think the loons are such a penetrating sound.
They're just identified with wilderness, Canadian wilderness.
Yeah, and I think that sense of, isolation is an important piece to talk about, because I see isolation as people who perhaps live in the city and they don't have soundscapes that they can just readily go out their front door, so they're isolated from those sounds, or they're overclouded by other sounds.
Here we are in not a wilderness, but in a beautiful garden, which is the closest a lot of us will ever get to being in a soundscape, that kind of a setting.
And I'm curious if you have any tips for identifying locations where one would maybe stop and listen.
The Cowichan Valley Naturalists, there's lots of members there who are in hiking groups, and they've got all sorts of places that they go to. Of course, even going down Cowichan Estuary to Dock Road, there's a nature trail along there now that has great hedgerow.
What is it about the hedgerows?
Well, it's the diversity of vegetation,
Oh, okay.
which brings in a diversity of insects. And, some birds will be feeding on the berries or the seeds.
Right.
Some birds will be feeding on the insects that are visiting those plants. It's just the diversity of the vegetation in the hedgerow. And the protection from predators, because some birds are predators and feed on these beautiful little songbirds.
Do they actually eat them? Or just the young ones? They eat all of them?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Yes, in this garden, we haven't seen it, but I'm told there's a Cooper's hawk that swoops through, an adult Cooper's hawk that swoops through and feeds on some of the birds that are at the feeder.
Ouch. My last question is the skill of listening. So yesterday I sat there in this tiny house that we have, and I have this window that's quite close to the ground, and I watched a robin pull up a worm, and I felt like I had this kind of aquarium. I was in the aquarium looking out, and they couldn't hear me, and I feel like I got this chance to witness nature from a place of safety for them, and for me, that I wasn't disturbing them. So I'm just curious about, how does one position themselves in a landscape in order to hear the best soundscape?
Pretty simple, I think. Do what we're doing right now. Just sit in the garden, in a forest, on the edge of a meadow. Just find some time for yourself to be by yourself and go to whatever spot you can find. And they'll come.
You had